This is the complete Lumenier QAV250 build manual for QuadQuestions.com. I understand that there might be some better ways to do this out there, or I may have not covered everything. And if that's the case, please comment on the video or go to QuadQuestions.com and go to the Q&A page and leave a question there. I'll be happy to personally answer your questions. And the purpose of these videos is to help people get flying. So I hope to see you out there soon, and thanks for watching.
Okay, so I am building a QAV250, and I'm starting here with the power distribution board. So this is the first thing on my desk. I got this and a couple of ESCs, and that's what I'm using to get started here. And this build is actually using the blue ESCs that are available on my website. They have a built-in BEC, which is really nice, and so I will be building it with those, utilizing those built-in BECs. It's important to pre-tin these pads. I mean, they're already pretty well pre-tinned from the factory, but I like to put a nice solder blob on all of them just to make it easier. So I'll just go ahead and do this live for you. So I keep my tip nice and clean when I do this, and I just have a wet sponge over here. But that's what I do to keep this thing clean, and then I make sure that I have plenty of heat. I use pretty thin solder. And I've got a different strategy for how I use these ESCs and how I align them on here, and it really just depends, but you want to make sure, I mean, it's pretty tight, so if you're using the red NFETs, you really run out of room. The blue ones seem to fit a little bit better, and then there's the KISS ESCs that I usually put out on the arms. So I'll just let you watch the time lapse and you'll get a feel for how I go about doing this. So I'll walk you through this ESC here, what I do to try to line it up. But you have to make sure that on this board, you know, that you're connecting negative to negative and positive to positive, and these pads are kind of close to each other. As you can see, I've got this nice solder blob on there already. So once I pre-tin the wires, it's a pretty simple process. So I just pay close attention to these holes, because these holes actually, these holes are the ones that get you. And so when you put your standoffs on, you know, you've got this wire that comes out close to these holes, so just be mindful of those. Sometimes I route this wire around this way, you know, and I have the standoff come through the middle there. That seems to work pretty well, even though it's not quite as clean as some people like. You're just so limited for space on this little voltage distribution board that that's kind of what you have to do. And I just align my tool right past the solder blob, cut the wire, and then I've got a nice little guy that I can just strip like that. So same with the negative. Just lay it across the pad, cut on the end, strip it. Tin it. Then you can just set it on your board. I kind of angle them a little bit, but once you have the two tin, you can just hit it with your iron and they melt together nice, and then you're done. Some people like to do the power leads first. You know, it doesn't really bother me to have to lift something up and solder underneath, but that's something to consider. And then I've been using it's 24 gauge silicone wire to connect the LEDs on these, and I've just made sure to use real nice flexible wire on all of my builds. I've had some problems with wires breaking because they're not flexible, and I've got another wire, for example, up here. Let me see. They just tend to break like right at the edge where you solder them if they're not flexible silicone wires, so make sure you don't skimp on this wire. And then on these wires, I like to twist the wire pairs here. It just makes for a little bit cleaner installation. Once I get all this put together, I've got my LED leads on there. I need to think about my power wire too. And I guess in hindsight, it's probably easier for a new builder to just do the LEDs and the power wires first, and then worry about the ESCs. For me, I don't really have a problem doing it either way, but the order of operations might be easier if you do that first, so keep it in mind. And I've done these power wires several different ways. I mean, sometimes they go off of the sides because I think that's where Lumenier intended them to go. Sometimes I'll actually swap the LED wires to the corners, and then I'll put the power leads right on the back. Some people like to run them up and around, but I usually like to hang them out of the back of the quad and then tie them to the battery underneath the props. And that way they can't fall into the props if you know, like something happens. So on this one, I mean, there's a post that goes right there, so I might try just bending them out of the way or moving them. But everyone's different. I just keep trying new spots to see if I can find a better place. But really, it might be a good idea if you just make your LED wires longer, run them to the corner, and then run your main power wires into the back here. So I just went ahead and changed it, and you'll see, you know, I angled these LED wires, and they're not touching, but man, it's close. So make sure that you've got insulation so you don't have a short there. But that's a little bit better, I think. And then you just have your LED wires come around, and then you can loop this around the back into your battery. Okay, then one thing you have to remember on these is before you put the power distribution board on, you need to make sure that this is oriented the right way, because it's got these recesses here for the LEDs. That's how you know this is the bottom. And you need to put your flight controller mounting hardware here first. So I sell kits for this. Normal Naze32s don't come with it. You can get them on my website, and the frame actually comes with some extra 5mm screws that you can use in here. And you can use it with the mounting hardware that I sell. And it's at this point in the game that I like to wrap my leads around the ferrite bead to make this thing all fit in together nice, and that's just supposed to help slow down the signals in the wires and just give you a little bit less electromagnetic interference, which can mess with your FPV stuff and can give you lines in your power. I don't think it's a substitution for an LC filter, but guys have been doing this, and it's supposed to help a little bit. So now is also a good time to label your leads. I use a paint marker for this, that way it doesn't rub off. When I orient this board, I usually like to orient it so that this Lumenier is pointing towards the front. That's just my personal preference, you know. But so yeah, I'll label these right now, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then I'll also label the ends so I know which ones are which. So once I have them all wrapped in that ferrite bead, I test fit it. And here you can see it usually takes a few tries for me to get it right. So now that I've got this sitting the way that I want, I'm going to put the spacers in between the lower board and the bottom plate of the quad. So I've got my test Naze32 here, and I just use this one. It's just a junk board. I use it for just checking everything. But I've been orienting these like this lately. and then I'll actually take these 90-degree pins and route them underneath. But that's just been making for a nice cleaner build. And if you get the case for this, and if you have anything hanging over the edges, or if you want to do the wrap that goes around the outside, then you can't have things like this sticking off the edge. And the way this board is designed, you've got things sticking off of 3 of the 4 edges, really. So you've got to use straight pins here, and then these guys you have to point forward, and then take these guys underneath this direction. So something to keep in mind. And now is a great time to solder your Naze32 together. Once you have your platform, you know how you're wiring it up, you kind of have an idea of what you need. That's when I would set your pins up. So you can see at this point I just added this voltage supply, and I just came down here to the power distribution board and just bridged it in right there. So basically what that does is that is the voltage that the Naze32 reads, and I've got that plugged into the bottom of the board here. Sorry for the shaky camera, but it's down in here. So you can kind of see what that configuration under there is looking like. It's getting a little intense, but it'll look good when it's done. I'm also going to put a buzzer on this second pin in, so that's another consideration. That's the next step. Okay, so I'm at this point now with the quad where I've got all the wiring put together for voltage monitoring. I've got the ferrite bead installed, and I've got the flight controller installed. You'll notice it's yaw 90 degrees clockwise, so I'll need to make sure that I set that up in software so that it knows which orientation it is in. And some people, you know, say you don't need the ferrite bead, and my response to that is, well, this is a radio controlled aircraft, and the point of this is to reduce noise and radio interference and electromagnetic interference, and you get that when you have long wire lengths at the end of voltage regulators, and that's what we have in these. So you know, I just put them in all of my quads. I think it's just the safe thing to do. I don't want this thing to you know, have any problems while it's flying, and that's just a safety precaution to make sure that there's no extra noise induced into the radio system or anything like that. So now that I've got this all set up, I'm going to reattach everything down here. I'll probably permanently mount the bottom board, and then I'm going to mount the LEDs, so we'll get to that process here in a minute. So this quad that I'm building today, it is going to have FPV gear, and we got some Fatshark Attitude goggles for this, and I like the Attitude setup because it comes with everything you need. Now, it comes with a transmitter, it comes with an LC filter, and it comes with a camera. And today I'm going to be looking at the LC filter because I don't really like it because it's big. So here's one fully packaged. They call it their it's like their balanced battery connector to get voltage to your video transmitter. And I'm actually going to modify this. This way I won't have to buy an LC filter. I'll just be able to use what they gave me. So if I look at it, if I lift up this capacitor and look underneath, lo and behold, there's a little tiny inductor down there. See it? L1. So this has everything that I need to make an LC filter. All I'm going to do is basically connect my positive lead from my battery. So this is a 3S quad. I'm just going to connect positive right there and negative right there. And Fatshark video transmitters actually can handle an input voltage anywhere from 6 to 17 volts, it says right there. So, you know, it can handle 4S. So battery's going to go right into this LC filter, and then we'll break off the other side and go to our camera and our transmitter. Okay, so you can see essentially what I've done here on this. I just removed a plug and put in a wire to the positive and negative of the plug for the 2-cell battery connector. And now I can just wire this right into the quad. I don't have to worry about balance connectors or trying to put this near my battery, because it's just not going to work very well for me in that respect. So, so you'll see, you know, in future videos, you might see me use these, because it seems silly to me to buy another LC filter when Fatshark comes with one. If you buy the Attitude set, you know, you might as well just use what you have and save a little bit of money, and you can still do it in a clean fashion. So hope that gives you some ideas out there. I think in the future, you know, for a personal quad, I would probably just cut this thing down, actually, to make it smaller. It doesn't weigh that much, but that still might just be a nice thing to do. So anyway, that's that. When it comes time to place these LEDs, orient your quad. You can tell where the front of the quad is because it has these little slots in the frame. But pre-tin the pads underneath, and then make sure that you put the one with the yellow looking LEDs on the front. I know it seems counterintuitive because those are clear, these are yellow, you'd think these would be red, but they're not. They're white, and if you don't do this, you'll have your lights backwards. So keep that in mind. And then I leave a little bit of slack in this wire, so what I'll do is just chop the wires right off here at the edge of the quad. That should give me enough to solder those on. Then the one thing that I use electrical tape for on these quads is I put a piece across these, because you can see they've got this recess here, but the thing about carbon fiber is it's conductive, and if these short out to the frame, you'll have a fire. So this is an integral part. You have got to put electrical tape on this, so don't forget. There's the electrical tape. And then the other thing about these is these little holes are pretty tight, and it comes with little tiny black screws in the kit that you're supposed to put in these little holes. So be very careful. You know, if you apply too much torque to them, you will break them. And once they're broken in those holes, the only thing you can do is glue this LED board on. So just take it easy. Maybe go in and come out, and then go in a little bit more, and then come out a little bit more. Kind of like threading a hole or something with a tap. So just keep it in mind. So now's a good time on this quad. Now that I've got the LEDs on, I've got the buzzer on, I've got all my wiring pretty much figured out, I'm going to now tighten these screws here, and I'm going to put Loctite on all of the screws. It's very important, because otherwise they come loose during flight, which is no good. So I'll Loctite all of these, and then I'll probably also put on the landing legs, and I'll probably put the motors on now too. So you're going to see the time lapse of that right now. So this is another thing I thought of. The landing gear is shorter than the main mounting hardware, so when you're putting the landing gear on, make sure to use the shorter pieces. The main hardware is just a little bit longer. Here's another thing. I've got a female JST connector connected to 12 volts for the FPV side of this quad. That way you can take it apart and be able to unplug the FPV stuff and troubleshoot it. So I just ran this down and connected it just right here to these other ESCs. So that should help. Okay, so I'm to this point now on this build where I want to connect the motors, And the problem is, you know, the rotation of the motors could be either way depending on what combination you wire these up in. So I'm going to put shrink wrap on, I'm going to solder the wires, but I am not going to shrink the shrink wrap until I test the rotation. It's somewhat intuitive for me now. You know, I know that if two of the wires get crossed on the motors, then they're probably going to spin backwards, but it's still a step that you can't forget when you're building these. So you'll see in the time lapse what I do, and I'll be back to show you in a minute the procedure as far as how to check the rotation. Okay, so now I've got all the motor connections soldered together, and I'm going to make sure I'm just putting the shrink wrap on loosely over the connections. Before I power this thing up, I'm going to just triple check these just to make sure that I don't have anything shorting out between these wire leads or between the wire leads and the frame, because that's a very bad thing if that happens. But you need to leave these loose until you check the rotation, and we'll see how well I did. So here you can see that the quad is all set up. I've got the shrink wrap over the leads, but there's nothing shorting out on these guys, so just make sure to triple check that before you do this. And so now I'll set up the quad and I'll apply power for the first time. So I'll check the flight controller, I'll check the receiver, and I'll probably bind it now since I've got it loose in here. I'll also calibrate the ESCs. So now comes a leg of base flight. And I go to firmware flasher. No reboot sequence shouldn't be checked if you don't have the bootloader pins shorted. I'm going to do a full chip erase. I don't need to worry about flashing slowly because I'm not flashing via Bluetooth or anything like that. It's a direct connection to my computer. So what I do is just go to load firmware, and by loading that firmware I get a stable release released pretty recently. It's about a month old now. So once I have that loaded from online, I can flash it. You just click flash firmware. You can see that the Naze32 is loading, and you've got that flashing status bar that is just loading up there. So it takes it a few minutes to complete. And you can see it's verifying now. Once it's done, we should get programming successful and the board resets itself. So that's all set. Now what I'll do is I'll go to leave firmware flasher, and it auto connected, and now I can see the board. And just to verify, I mean, you can see right now I don't have the settings set up, so because I have the board in 90 degrees, you know, that's causing the computer to get confused. It thinks, you know, forward and back is left and right and all that. But all that aside, I'm just here to do some motor testing. So once I get this set up, I go to the motor testing tab and then click motor test notice, check. Then I give this full throttle, and now is the time that I plug in my battery. When I plug in my battery, I'm going to just loosely connect it. I'm not going to stick it in the plug all the way, because now's the time. If you do have a short or something, you're going to find out real quick because you'll see the magic smoke. So I'll just go ahead and hook this battery up right now. Okay, so I got the battery hooked up, and I don't see any smoke or anything coming off, which is a really good sign. So now's the time to check the motors. So I started this up with the throttle all the way up when I plugged this battery in, and I did that so I can calibrate the ESCs first. So you'll see I'll just go down here to the bottom, click that, and I heard a simultaneous beep, so now I know I'm good. And now I'll just go through and check the motors. And I've got motor 1 here, which is this motor. I should see this motor spin towards the inside. This is the back of the quad here. So this motor should spin around this way, and that's what I'm checking for right now. So I'll just go ahead and turn this up a little bit. And it's spinning the wrong way. So what I'm going to have to do on this one is swap some wires out. So I'm going to note that down, and then I'll move on to the next one. So now I'll go on to the next one. Check it out. Looks good. So I'll give it some throttle. Now this one should be spinning, you know, this direction towards the center again. So go to motor 2, give it some throttle here, and that one's spinning the correct direction. So we're 50% correct so far. I'll do the same thing. I'm going to go to motor 3 now, which is this guy right here. It should be spinning towards the middle. So I'll check it now. And it's spinning the right direction. Alright, so let's see if the last one is spinning right or not. So if you follow the pattern, you know that this thing should be going this way, or clockwise. So check motor 4. And it's spinning right. So the only one that I have to switch around is motor 1. Its rotation's backwards. And I will go through how to do that now. What's nice about this is we've actually calibrated our ESCs, and we've tested our motors, and we've tested our basic electronics all in one step. So that makes it really nice and easy for us to continue on from here and start worrying about things like setting up the parameters for the Naze32, finding our receiver, getting our radio all set up, and just finishing this build. So what I will do now is walk you through the steps to switch this motor rotation, and I'll give you the full video on that so you can see exactly how to do it. So we're going to reverse the rotation on motor number 1. So I disconnected the battery, I disconnected the flight controller, so we're not hot anymore. So I just flip the quad over, and I know that I've got this guy. This is motor 1 here, and I'll zoom in so you can see this. Okay, and so essentially what I'm going to do here is just swap 2 of the wires. So I've got 3 wires here. I'll probably swap this wire with this wire. I'll leave the third one the way it is, and that's how you change the rotation on these. Some ESCs have, like KISS ESCs have a little tiny solder jumper that you can put on to easily change this rotation, which is really handy. But for most quads, and pretty much for all of my builds, I do them this way. I've got nice soldered connections. I don't have any bullet connectors or anything that can come loose in flight. So I'm just going to swap these 2 wires, and then it should be rotating the correct direction. So I'll do that now. It's easy to forget your order, so especially because the wires are all black, so sometimes it might help you to mark the wires first. So I got that one swapped. Swap this guy now, and we should be all set. And once it's done, I like to give the wires a good tug to make sure that I've got a good solder joint. So those are good. And now my next step is actually to just go ahead and shrink all the shrink wrap on these, because I know that the rotation is right now that I've swapped this. And if you want to double check first, you can go through the motor testing procedure one more time and then shrink these if you're a little bit unsure of yourself, but I'm pretty confident. So just get this on here. I use a heat gun for this. If you do a lot of shrink wrapping, a heat gun is what you should be using. Some guys use a torch and it just makes for a little bit too much heat. Let's see. So you can see those are nice and shrunk now. Hopefully I didn't get that out of the shot too much, but I'll show you again on this one. So just get these nice and lined up and then hit it with a little bit of heat from the heat gun. See, they shrink up nicely. And it doesn't take very much. Do it again on this guy. And then on my last motor, so now that I've got that done, I'm just going to come in here and just double check these, make sure that I don't have any exposed wire, and make sure that they're all shrunk up so that they all look good. These guys look good. So that should do it. So now what I'll do is plug this quad back in, check it one more time, and we should see now that this motor direction's changed. So okay, so now I'm going to check this last motor that I just rewired this guy. So I'm going to make sure that he's pointing this direction. So spinning this way towards the center. I actually drew a little picture for you guys to see that. So that's what it should look like. Anyway, so same procedure here. I'm just going to plug the quad back in, do the Naze32 first. Then I've got my computer connecting here. Alright, so it worked that time. That's nice. Just go to motor testing tab. Now this time I don't need to worry about starting with full throttle or anything like that. Just make sure the propellers are off, click check, and now I'll connect my battery back up. Same thing, just do it. I like to just connect it loosely anytime it's on the bench, just in case. So I got it all plugged in, ESCs are ready. Now I'll just go to motor number 1 and just give it a little bit of throttle, see what happens here. And it's spinning the right direction now. So I can test all of them with master at this point. Let's see. Just to make sure they're all working, spinning the right way. Everything looks good. Now I can move on to the next step, which is I'm going to continue on the FPV part of this. If you're not building an FPV quadcopter, you can skip ahead, and I'll post the time at the bottom of the video so you can find it. So my next step with this is to solder this Minimosd, and since I'm building an FPV quadcopter, the on-screen display, this is an awesome one that I sell. It's the Team KV mod that I put on these, and they're unique because they have the pinout, so you can get to the processor pins, so you can add things like extra battery voltage monitoring, RSSI, display on your on-screen display, and you use these pins up here for that. So that's really nice, and these are actually already modified. You can see here there's a solder blob here. It actually connects the ground plane across, and so when you wire these up, you don't connect 12 volts of ground. You just connect video in and out, and then this board gets power from this side over here. It just takes a 5-volt input and routes it to this side of the board. And that's good because these things have this voltage regulator built in, but it's notorious for being really noisy, and people have had a lot of problems using this. So we just take it out of the mix with this board, and so all you need to do is hook up your 5 volts here and your video here. You need TX and RX and ground, obviously, but once you do that, it's all set up and ready. So definitely a nice board. Okay, so now I'm to the point where I'm going to align the FPV stuff. The Fatshark video transmitter is pretty long, so I'm actually going to hang it out the back a little ways. The QAV250 platform just doesn't have much room for mounting. Then that should allow room for the Minimosd board to go in here, and then I'll have a little bit of room for the camera right there. So we'll continue, and then this camera has a 2.1 millimeter lens, which is a wide angle. It's not the best for FPV, so I'm actually going to swap out that lens for a 2.8 millimeter lens. But these are the only cameras that I can get at this point in time, so that's where I'm at. Now I also need to cut this camera down. I'm going to use pliers to cut around this this board here, so so that way it'll fit on the QAV250. This thing here is the buttons for the on-screen display for the camera, and that's how you set your camera settings like brightness and things like that. You don't need it on the quad to fly, so I'll just unplug this, and then to program the camera you just have to plug this in and then use this board to do that. So, and I'm going to make custom cables for power. This thing needs 5 volts, so this Fatshark is a 5-volt output, and it's down the line from the LC filter, so I'll just take that 5-volt output, go into the Minimosd, and then the camera takes 12 volts, so I'll splice into this wire here. So when it's all done, it should be real nice. Should just plug in this one plug, and that will be all your FPV gear. Hey guys, so just one last thing here. I'm putting props on this quad. I've gone through this quad thoroughly. The quad's finished. Everything's good. I triple checked motor rotation. I made sure that I don't have any shorts. I set my fail-safe first. I set all my fail safes on these things to just cut the props. It's safer that way. That way, if you're a new pilot and you accidentally cut the radio off before you turn the quad off, it won't spin up on you. As you get more advanced, you might want to change your failsafe to gently come down if you lose radio, but I'll leave that up to you guys if you buy a quad from me. So I'm putting these HQ props on here today, and basically you can tell which way they spin because there's basically like a curved edge to these. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, there's the curve. So I know that this propeller spins clockwise, and so I know that this motor spins clockwise, so this propeller goes here. This is a 5x3R2. That's another way of seeing the propeller rotation. See if I can get that. It's kind of a hard thing to get in focus. Well, anyway, it says 5x3R there, so this one goes here, and then the regular rotation is just a 5x3, just this guy. And you just really, there it is, 5x3. There's no R. If you look at it, you can tell that this propeller rotates counterclockwise. So counterclockwise is going to go on this motor and this motor. So I just, I like these HQ props. You need to make sure that you put the right insert into the bottom of them if you're using HQ props. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The inserts are right here. You just make sure that you choose the right one for your motor. So these are the 2350 Lumenier motors, and they'll take, I usually just feel it out. This one's too loose, this one's too small, this one's just right. So I use these on all of these.
So that's the build video. Please subscribe to my channel, go to the website QuadQuestions.com and ask questions.